Children are joyful and curious, but also can make drastic mistakes. Mistakes that have a larger consequence than themselves. Annabelle Gwynn, a 9-year-old girl living in the state of Virginia. She was a student in the class of 33 students in 1935. She wasn't unlike the other students. She was bright and happy, her deep red braids bouncing every time she took a step. She usually wore a simple black dress and red shoes, a teal necklace given to her by her mother around her neck. Her simple attire helped focus on her beautiful face. She had fair skin and crystal blue eyes, topped with crimson red hair wrapped in those 2 loose braids. One of her faults that led to the annoyance of others was her mouth that would not stop. She would talk and talk, speaking with every person she met. Being a small school in those times, positivity and being that talkative were annoying tributes. People often ignored her, but she somehow got her way with her peers. Fed up with Annabella, her peers made a decision. They decided on the afternoon of April 13, 1935, they would play a game in the woods. They chose hide and seek, where they invited Annabella as a 13th member of the group. Little did they know, their innocence would take a dark turn. After the last bell rung on a sunny afternoon, every child burst out of the small building into the streets, except for a few. A group of 12 kids stood behind the school giggling to themselves, watching as Annabella walked down the street alone. A few jogged after her, making small talk before they asked her to join them. Her ignorance got the better of her and she agreed to follow. They all ran into the woods, asking Annabella to be the first seeker, to which she agreed. She turned her back, counting back from 100, as the other children scattered around the woods. She spent many minutes looking for them, but couldn't find them. Every time she felt she was getting close to someone, she would hear giggles and them getting further and further away. As the game went on, she began to hear her peers tease her from their hiding spots. They shouted things like stupid, annoying, anything to make her feel inferior. Finally, someone shouted, "Ugly," from behind a tree before running off. The last spoken word to Annabella. Annabella began to panic. Silence filled the woods, none of her peers to be found. Becoming despite and lost, she walked deeper into the woods, screaming the names of the children. A few hours passed, and the children agreed to go and look for the girl. They entered the woods, yelling for Annabella, but with no response. Annabella wasn't found until 3 days later. Her body was found in a riverbank deep in the woods, her body half submerged in the thick mud, only the right half of her face clear. Many of her bones found broken, her throat slit, and even her tongue was removed, found about 10 miles up the river. This case still remains open. The culprit was never found. Her family never got to say goodbye to their daughter. I worked late at the station reading over old case files. I stumbled on this one. As horrible as it sounds, I found this one rather interesting. All this could have been avoided if the jealousy of a few children didn't get out of hand. A young girl's life abruptly ended in an abomination. A shame. So I continued to read the older files at the station before making my way home. Plenty of cars sped down the road, but I let them go on. My rush to get back to my apartment. Locking my car, I grabbed up my bag and ran inside. I threw the documents on the table and entered the kitchen, grabbing a beer from my fridge. I stood in my kitchen when I heard it, the sound of liquid spilling out onto the floor. I searched the bathrooms, the kitchen, but I couldn't find the source, so I ignored it. A few hours passed except for the television Silence filled the small apartment. Man found dead in his late home in Chicago last night, believed to be killed by a home intruder. His cause of death unknown. And the news reports continued. I investigated that one. It was strange. He was believed to be murdered by a home intruder, but his house had no trace of open doors or windows. In fact, they were all locked. I and the rest of the team are still investigating. I turned off the TV and headed to bed. A few hours after falling asleep, I heard a dripping noise. It continuously dripped, the sound echoing around the space. I got up and walked towards the bathroom to turn off the shower head that sometimes drips due to faulty piping. I opened the shower curtain and threw myself against the opposite tile wall. My heart nearly escaped through my throat. There stood in the shower a young girl, her throat pouring out black liquid onto the shower floor. Her eyes were a clear blue and her face looked as if she was in severe pain. She tried to speak, but she could only make a gurgling sound. The black liquid continued to pour out of her mouth as well. I was so full of panic I just stood there frozen. Sweat pouring down my face as I searched around for something to defend myself. But when I looked up, she was gone. Shit, I thought to myself. Murders and alcohol don't mix. I couldn't sleep, not after seeing that thing, hallucination or not. The next few nights were relatively average. Work late shift, head home, watch some documentaries on things no one really cares about, and head to bed. But the fifth night was different. Tonight is different. I heard glass shatter in another room, like a plate falling off the counter or a frame falling off the wall. Believing it to be an intruder, I went to investigate. My gun in hand, I turned the corner to my kitchen, and I couldn't move. Not out of fear or shock, I physically couldn't move. Then I saw it. Down at the end of the hallway, the tall mirror was shattered all over the floor. I saw it lift itself up, and underneath stood a young girl. A girl with crimson braids and a slit throat. She walked down the hall slowly, her face completely void of emotion. Her black dress covered in dried mud and blood, but only the left half. She didn't say a word, only stood in front of me, staring into my eyes. And then she smirked. Her face began to reform, her eyes widened and became black. Only small white dots where her pupils were previously. A tar-like substance poured from her sockets and mouth. Her teeth grew and sharpened, similar to a dog's teeth, and she snarled. Without warning, she jumped on my chest, knocking my body back onto the floor. My head hit in the tile. I still couldn't move or even speak. I felt warm liquid spread on the back of my head as she stood and walked to the other side of the room. When she returned, she sat on my stomach, holding something in her hands. She lifted her case file up and pulled out a photo, a small photograph of a boy in a school uniform, a photograph of one of the children who left her in the woods, a photo of my grandfather. She threw the file against the wall and lifted up her tiny hand. Before I knew it, she ripped her hand through my stomach. I could feel her hand searching around my stomach. The pain was unbearable. Blood poured out the sides of the hole she created. Before she was finished, she leaned down and whispered into my ear, "You killed me because I was ugly," she said before she violently ripped out my stomach. I let out a final scream before everything went black. Charles Harrison was found dead in his apartment last night at 12:56. Believed to be killed by a home intruder, found in his kitchen, gun in hand fully loaded, and no sign of a struggle. Cause of death? Drowning. Found his lungs full of water, and his stomach full of mud.